Well, hello, my name's Adrian Gilbert, welcoming you back again to the Invisible College. And today we're going to be talking about one of my most favourite subjects, which is transformation. The whole idea that we as human beings can be transformed from our caterpillar stage into the equivalent of a butterfly or dragonfly. Now, this idea goes way back, but probably the earliest system that we have properly described to us belongs to what is generally referred to as alchemy. Now, if you've heard the word alchemy, you've probably associated in your mind with ideas of turning lead into gold, the quest for the mysterious philosopher's stone, and ideas of that sort, and probably as the idea that this is the early form of chemistry, that our modern chemistry is derived from alchemy. But the concept of transformation is actually much deeper than that, and has always been understood as being so. And what's been in mind to be transformed has not really been metals or minerals or herbs or whatever. It's actually ourselves. And one of the people who drew attention to this in the present century was a man called C.G. Jung, a famous psychologist who was very active in the 20th century in promoting a new system of psychology, exploring in depth the collective unconscious. And Jung sort of became famous for collecting old books on alchemy and exploring their symbolism, and describing those symbols in terms of what he called archetypes, that there were archetypal forms which make up the collective unconscious, and that if you can understand those archetypes and understand how they're processing through your own mind in your dreams and in your fantasies, then you can begin to get a grip on what's happening with your own psyche, and heal any problems there may be, and initiate what he called the individuation process, the idea of integrating the self within the mind to being something greater than the simple ego. Well, that was all well and good and very satisfying to psychologists, and great fun playing with old alchemical symbols. But there are a lot of flaws in that approach, and I'm going to show what I think some of those flaws are today. I mean, for one thing, if you look at an archetype, and here we have typical archetypes, you could say mother and child. That is one of the archetypes that Jung describes, and you can describe the Virgin Mary in terms of the archetypal mother feeding her baby. And if you take that symbol and you move backwards in time, you can see that the goddess Isis is exactly the same archetype, the mother feeding the baby. You could go even further still. You can say the earth is just the archetype of the mother feeding the baby. But this is only giving you a very small part of the story. It's actually something much deeper than this. And if you really want to understand the symbolism of this particular alchemical drawing, just saying, well, the earth is a mother, she's feeding her babies, is not enough. The symbol actually has meaning within the context of alchemy itself. And that applies to many other symbols, both within religion and within alchemy. So if you take a symbol like this one, for instance, where you have a hermaphroditic figure standing on a symbol of the moon, holding a cup with 3 serpents in one hand and a raven in the other, and there's a mysterious tree with moons on it, you could start analysing that from Jungian terms and saying, well, this is just an archetype of the unconscious, the hermaphrodite in us all. But that is actually doesn't explain the symbolism of alchemy, because you'll find this image and similar images described by many different alchemists, and they weren't all having the same fantasies about being hermaphrodites standing on moons with trees in the background. This is actually a key, and it actually contains certain knowledge which only initiates would understand. And they were drawing these pictures and describing these processes in elliptical ways which they would understand, and people who had been initiated up to a certain level would understand, and they saw this, they, yeah, okay, right, got it. But someone approaching it from outside, even if they're a top psychoanalyst, are not going to make much headway unless they really work with the symbol itself, trying to understand what it's really meant to be all about. So this particular image represents the achievement of what's called the white stone in alchemy. And the white stone, if you project it onto materials, will generate silver. And then it can be transmuted again into the red stone. And it's a code that you've got to analyze using the tools of alchemy itself. So when you have the symbol of the red stone here, you might wonder why on earth you have another double-headed figure, this time with the trees with the sun on it, and he's got a lion on a leash and some kind of stick to control a serpent while he's standing on a hilltop. Odd, I mean, if you come across a picture like that and you think, well, this is either this guy's barking mad or he knows something which he's not telling me, and I'm afraid it probably is the latter. So that image there represents the red stone, and it's linked with the tree of the sun rather than the moon. The moon tree is symbolic of silver, and the sun tree is symbolic of gold, because if you project the red stone onto your first matter, it will turn it into gold, so they say. We'll be examining what that's really all about as we go on. So we've got to return to first principles with alchemy. And then when we do that, we can see that the symbols are not the product of one man's imagination. They're actually the part of some universal language, a secret tradition. And you can see here where we have another drawing from a completely different book, very, very similar to the last one we were looking at, holding the cup up with the three serpents, standing on a hill with some kind of serpent type or dogs biting themselves, a tree of the sun, and there's a pelican feeding itself, and behind him is a green lion. Now, the key to the proper understanding of alchemy is our cosmic laws. And one of the first alchemists to start really trying to put this into context and to create a system of ideas that could be worked with was the gentleman on the left-hand side here, who's called Basil Valentine, or Basilius Valentinus, who was a monk. And that's, quite normal. I mean, most of the kind of wise men who were practicing alchemy in the Middle Ages and coming up into sort of 15th, 16th century were actually monks or priests. And that's for a very good reason. First of all, though they were among the few people who could read and write in the ancient world. The cleric, the reason we have the word clerk or cleric is because, originally it was clerics who did the writing. So if you wanted to employ someone to be your secretary to write things, or, you could dictate things to him to write, he would need to be a cleric. We use it more widely now, but that's why. And he devised a system of steps or keys which could be analysed and understood, and I've discussed those in an earlier lecture, so I'm not going to go into that. But it began to put the whole system of alchemy, the ideas of transforming materials from one thing into another, into a format which could be systematised. And on the right here we have another figure who represents Hermes Trismegistus, the supposed father of alchemy, the Greek name for the Egyptian god Thoth or Tehuti. And he was the great initiate. He symbolises what you would like to be. You want to be as initiated as he was. He had some kind of, in the book called Hermetica, he has some kind of out-of-body experience where he's taken and shown the universe and man's place in it, and everything's explained to him. And he starts a school where he teaches these ideas to his pupils. So he's kind of the archetypal teacher, the archetypal, I'm using that word, the Jung word, you like that, the great teacher who shows the way. And you can see here, among the systems used, there's an instrument above his head with the symbols of the planets above, like a panpipe, flute arrangement. You've got a violin or a cello or whatever it is next to him there with a bow. Again, the idea of the music of the spheres. And you can see there's a furnace there with he's holding an alchemical retort. And above him, there's a sun shining through a prism. And I can't see what the other bit there is next to it. But anyway, Hermes Trismegistus represents this idea of the above, so below. That if you want to understand what's happening here, you study the cosmos. If you want to understand the cosmos, you study what's happening below, and particularly within you. So that's how people were beginning to approach the subject of alchemy in the Middle Ages and just after, around the Renaissance. And those laws really concern our possibilities for transformation. For just as chemistry studies and uses the laws governing the transformation of physical matter, so a true alchemist is concerned with the laws of transformation of subtle matters. Now, a great figure in all of this, who I'm going to be talking quite a bit about, is Robert Fludd. And he was working in the sort of early part of the 17th century, 1600s. And he's generally referred to as being kind of old-fashioned. He was a sort of Renaissance man when Renaissance men were going out of date. You know, when the whole world was moving into science, you know, the new science. Well, I don't see him that way. I actually see him in a completely different way, as being a visionary who was hundreds of years ahead of his time, because he was combining ideas of science, or science as was understood then, still in its infancy, with the concept of how does that apply to me as a human being and my possibilities for transformation. How can I use that knowledge and that information to model for myself what might be my possibilities in terms of wishing to be a transformed human who can get back to God. So he wrote a number of books which were published in Germany. He's known as being a Rosicrucian, which again is a word we've been using in some of the earlier lectures. It really means someone who believes that we should be increasing our knowledge in terms of science and applying that to our religious ideas and vice versa. And he wrote a number of well-illustrated books which were published in Germany, mainly in Frankfurt by Johann Theodor de Bry, who was a great publisher of alchemical books. And many of those illustrations that I was showing you from alchemy were published by him. And Robert Fludd's philosophy, using his philosophy, his books are very well illustrated, which is a great help to us because we can use those to explore his ideas here. He divides the human being into three parts. There's a kind of belly part, which he labels naturalis facultas, which means natural resources in your stomach area. And then the second part, thorax, he labels vita, which means life. And then the head part, third chamber as it were, he labels intellectus, intellect. And then above, in the sky, above the head, is mind. And you can see how mind is throwing out rays into the human being. He's being penetrated by these rays from above. And within the concept of his theology and his alchemy is the idea that God above us is radiating us with higher thoughts, higher mind, which can raise our spirits and bring us back up. And another of his diagrams, and I think I may have maybe showed you this one in an earlier lecture as well, is the concept of the descent of the soul. Now, within the Hermetic tradition, they believe that souls originally are formed and are with God, out of time, out of space, in the divine presence. And the souls then descend through different spheres. And in the system presented by Robert Fludd, they pass through angelic spheres first. They go through spheres of the seraphim and cherubim and dominions. These are these are spheres of different angels and archangels and higher angels first. They pass through those spheres. Then they come through this sphere of the stars in the heavens, the fixed stars, and then through the spheres of the various planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. And then when they've passed through those spheres, they go down through the spheres of the elements, fire, air, water and earth, ending up at Terra, which means earth, at the bottom. So your soul comes down through these spheres and gradually it gets into deeper and deeper matter, or condensations, further and further away from God, until it ends up here as a physical person on the earth. Now, man's position in relation to the creation, according to Fludd, he shows how the three parts of us, and you can see it sort of roughly here, you've got a face in that top part, a kind of chest area and then a belly area, correspond in Fludd's system to the basal area, here, the region of the elements is a terrestrial existence, and that's all governed by elements. You could call earth, water, and air different states of matter, solid, liquid, and gas, if you like. Fire, the element of fire, we actually understand is better now than we used to. It's what's actually called plasma. And we now understand that the whole universe is filled with plasma. What plasma is atoms which have been stripped of all their electrons. And as such, they are charged particles. And space is not empty. There is plasma throughout it. And because these particles are charged, they conduct electricity, and they also manufacture, as the electricity passes through the plasma, makes for magnetic fields. And there's a whole new physics developing on this, which isn't talked about very much because it contradicts a lot of the ideas of Big Bang theories and black holes and the rest of the fairy dust ideas. The beginnings of the understanding of the way that the fire element works and plasma and electricity is conducted through the universe gives rise to a whole different understanding that the sun and the stars and the planets and everything are all being driven by energy flowing from the center, in our case the center of the Milky Way, and causing these great arms of galaxies and causing the stars to illuminate more in the way that fluorescent lights illuminate when you pass electricity through them. So this is a whole other subject, but we can begin to see that our earthly level, physical level, is governed by the elements of solid, liquid, air, and plasma. On the second level, region of the planets, is what is known as the astral world. Now, I want to clear up a few misunderstandings about this. The use of the word astral in this context it means star, yes, but it's actually more to do with the idea of subtle energies connected with emotion. And that's what's being processed in your chest. And another thing I think we should also understand is that the air you breathe, which is taken into your chest to be processed, carries within it subtle energies. Just as water can have dissolved in it air, and it's actually the air dissolved in water is what fish breathe. They don't breathe the water, they breathe the air in the water. So the air that we breathe contains subtle matters in it. And those subtle matters can vary quite considerably depending on where you are and the situation you're in and what subtle energies are in that air. So this is a lot to do with the ideas of why we have temples and churches and special places like concert halls where energies are put into the air that are kind of a food for us that you can take in as you breathe. And then the third space processes in the region of the mind and the higher mind, and that's all to do up here. And then above it is the world of God, as it were. We can see another pattern here of Fludd's cosmic man. And here again, you see the bottom elements, and there's a boundary. And that's actually marked by the diaphragm, which separates your chest area from your sort of bowels and lower area here. And then there's the circle of the sun marked on his diagram, which corresponds with the heart region. And then another separating boundary area round through your neck. And then you have above, there's the boundary of the intellect. But again, he has the symbol of the Godhead above, and rays from the mind of God penetrating down into the mind, into the head. So the concept that Fludd is trying to convey here is the idea that, yes, man has got this sort of three-story being. He's got a sort of belly area, chest area, and a head area, like a three-box unit. But he's not limited to that. He can also receive energy through his head, through his mind, actually mainly through his pineal gland, into his head, into his mind, to inspire him and cause greater transformations. So he's showing here two processes. One is a descending process, as the energy and the mind energy of God is channeled downwards into us. And you can think of that as being, how can I put it? If you take a hot water source and you heat up some water, the heat will, if you've got an electric ring and you put a saucepan on it filled with cold water and you switch on the electric ring, the energy from the electric ring will heat up the water. And that's what you might call a descending process. So there's a high intensity energy of the mind of God irradiating into us, and that can cause our intellect to become more vibrant and alive and radiant itself. And then conversely, there's another process, which is an ascending process, where we're trying to refine ourselves to make better energies in our metabolism. So the food you eat, you process in your tummy, and the energies that releases enable your other systems to work. The food goes into your bloodstream, your blood takes it round to the different organs in your body, and you're nourished by that food. And the same thing with your other air that you breathe in, that nourishes your body, oxygenates your blood, enables you to live, to carry out your functions. And also the food that you take into your head through your senses particularly also nourishes you and helps you to stay alive and to process. So there's these two processes. One is like an external source of God pouring energy into you, very fine, high energy coming into you through your head. And the other end is the process of evolving energies from the food you eat and the air that you breathe, and taking it upwards, evolving these substances to make finer substances that can then be used as well in the manufacture of your higher processes. And you can see those diagrams put together here in this triple diagram. And you can see how, on the one hand, there's sort of kind of the energy, the soul energy on the left gradually moves down, getting denser and denser as it does so down to the bottom. The energy taken from the mind of God slows down. If you can think of the vibrations being slowed down as they come down through creation, vivifying everything. And on the other side, you can see this evolutionary process going upwards, where the matter is being processed and taken back up towards God. So the left-hand diagram here represents descent, and the right-hand diagram represents ascent, and then you've got the two processes together in the middle. I suppose you might call that consent, I don't know. He uses another symbol here a lot, which is called the monochord of vibrations. Now, you probably know that if you have an octave and you play a note in one octave, like C, and then you can play it in another octave, C, and the two, I don't know if that was exactly right, I think I'm reasonably toneful, but the two would be actually in harmony with one another, just one being an octave above the other. So you do that, as you probably know, on a stringed instrument. You compress your strings in the right place. Halfway along, the two sides of the string will vibrate at an octave higher pitch than the full string when it's totally released. And you can see that on his diagram here, where he's going up an octave, starting at G. He's written a gamma at the bottom for a Greek G. He goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G in capitals, and then you have above it A, B, C, D, E, F, and then he's put double G in small letters going up. And in the middle he's got the sun. So he's showing you this idea of octaves, that the processes on one level are harmonic and harmonious to processes on another level, and the whole thing is linked to the idea of music. So we have the sun, earth to sun representing one octave, and from the sun to the absolute representing another octave. Now, the true hermit realizes that the quest for truth is not an arbitrary, but involves finding a system of understanding the world and man's place within it. And this wasn't just the old guys like Robert Fludd. It also applies to many modern-day mystics. And one such was this gentleman, P.D. Uspensky, who I've also mentioned in an earlier lecture. So a Russian émigré, left Russia after the First World War and came to England, spent most of his last 30 years here. And he was, in 1914, he had travelled to Egypt, India and Egypt, looking for answers to his basic questions. And his most famous book was In Search of the Miraculous, which is published posthumously in 1950, a book well worth reading in my opinion. And it contains many modern insights, very similar in some respects to what we've been looking at with the work of Robert Fludd. And his teacher, who had taught him the system that he taught in England after he came here, was a guy called G.I. Gurdjieff. And Search the Miraculous has a subtitle, Fragments of an Unknowing Teaching. Well, that unknown teaching he got from Gurdjieff. And Gurdjieff claimed that he'd been one of a group of researchers we call the seekers after truth, aren't we all? And sometimes together, but more often individually, they'd travelled the world. This is in the late 19th century, looking for knowledge. And they'd pull their knowledge, and from it he'd developed his system. One of the key tools in Gurdjieff's system is this idea of octaves. So you've got here on a piano here, you've got the notes marked C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and you can see that that marks one octave. But something I want you to notice here is that you've got 7 white notes moving from C to the next B, 8 when you get to the next C. But in between those white notes, you've got 5 black notes. So actually an octave contains 12 notes in all. There's 7 white and 5 black, and the 5 black mark semitones. But there's a couple of places where there are notes missing. Anyway, this marks you an octave. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. I think that's roughly it. And then it repeats again going up your piano. And Gurdjieff used this to describe how creation works and how God had made the world. So if you think about this idea of this ray of God, we're talking about the mind of God and these rays coming down through the intellect, or coming down, increasing in density as they go down. Well, he used a different diagram where he showed how creation comes down an octave, beginning with the absolute, through what he calls all worlds, all suns, our sun, all planets, planet Earth, moon, and then down to a kind of lower absolute. And that forms an octave. And God's logos, or word. Logos means word in Greek, but it also means law, edict. So God issues edicts, let it be, let such and such happen. And the energy from that logos, as it's fired out into creation, gradually causes materializations at different levels and becomes condensified as it goes down. And the earth is subject, I should say that the laws, as you go down, things become more restricted. So by the time you get down to earth, you've gone from 1 to 3 to 6 to 12 to 24 to 48. So we're, in this system of Gurdjieff, we're under 48 laws or restrictions. That's more restricted than the sun, but less restricted than the moon. If you were living on the moon, you would be under 96 restrictions or laws, according to this system. So the moon is kind of like a lower level than the earth, and the sun is a higher level. So the root of Gurdjieff's system is the idea that the human body is a machine, but one with the potential to incubate higher bodies. So you've got a physical body. We all know that one. We have an astral body. Not so many know about that. We have a mental body. Yeah. And then a spiritual body. So you can define that we have 4 bodies. And these 4 bodies are of increasing subtlety, and they correspond to the 4 elements of the old alchemists. I'm using this idea of the elements more as symbols than actually talking about physicality or matter. So the physical body, well, that's obviously earth, physical lump. Astral body, symbolically, is connected with water. And the mental body, sorry, we've jumped on too far. The mental body with air, and the spiritual body with fire. Now, in the West, these ideas are often veiled in an opaque symbolism, but we understand that our 4 parts to ourselves roughly correspond with the 4 elements of earth, water, air, and fire. So to understand this, think of the chariot card in the tarot. The physical body, earth, is the chariot itself. The horses, or in this case they're sphinxes, who pull it are the emotions, and that's water. And the driver is the mind. The mind should be in control of the horses, right? So the driver should be steering those horses or those sphinxes, not just letting them pull wherever they want. And finally, the unseen passenger is the soul, which is fire, and it should be giving instructions to the driver, telling him where it wants him to steer to. So it's no use having a chariot, even if you can steer it really well, if you don't know what your destination is. And it should be the soul, or the higher spiritual being inside you, that tells you where you're trying to get to and where the driver should be taking you. I mean, you don't go into a taxi and then just say, well, drive me somewhere, will you? You say, take me to Charing Cross. So in Gurdjieff's system, the higher bodies are linked with higher worlds. So you can see on this diagram, you've got your earth, physical body, 48 laws, right? We all know that. We're all only too familiar with that, with the constraints on us. The astral body would be at 24 laws, corresponding to all planets. The mental body at 12 laws would correspond to the level of the sun, and the 4th body, or 6 laws, would correspond to all suns. Now, we don't need to understand what the difference is between one sun and all suns or whatever. Just understand that there's this concept, this idea of physicality with certain type of body, and higher, more subtle bodies being linked with higher and more subtle worlds. Now, according to this teaching, subtle bodies, once developed, can exist separately from the physical body, which is quite interesting if you think about it. And they survive death, and being constrained by fewer laws than the physical, can move to higher levels of creation. Well, that's rather interesting, exciting, and begins to put concepts of going to heaven into some kind of framework that we can begin to work with. And Gurdjieff also used this kind of three-body compartment idea, which is similar to the way that we'd seen it with Robert Fludd. So you've got a head, a chest, and a back, lower body. And quite obviously, the lower body processes solid food. Now, when I say solid food, that includes all of the kind of substance that we eat. You know, there's liquids in there as well, I know. And dissolved in those liquids is going to be some gases. And there's certain heat, you call that fire as well. But that all goes into your tummy, your lower level. The chest level processes air. And as I was saying earlier, air is not just oxygen and nitrogen with a little bit of argon and a bit of carbon dioxide thrown in. It also contains subtle energies. That's why sometimes when you go out in a spring day and it's lovely sunshine, it's beautiful and nature's looking wonderful, you breathe in, it feels fantastic. Another time you go to some crowded place in a city, the air might not be that different, but the vibrations in the air might feel really horrible and terrible. And you say, oh, I just don't want to be here. It's because there are different vibrations and subtle energies in the air as well as the air itself. And your head, according to Gurdjieff, processes impressions. Now, I was saying about how we receive things through our senses, but it's not quite as simple as that. It's like your radio set will pick up a radio wave, but within that radio wave, there'll be modulations. And those modulations are what you're actually listening to. You're not just listening to the carrier wave. The carrier wave is needed to carry the signal, but the signal itself gives you the arches or the shipping forecast, whatever it is that you want to listen to. And those things are what give you the impressions. And it's the same with your mind. Your mind can pick up energies, all sorts of thoughts and ideas and processes, and it needs to be able to switch on and connect to them to receive food of thought. And it's possible, if you train yourself, to be able to think thoughts which had never been thought before on this planet. You can tune in on higher thought, which is what people like Robert Fludd were doing and how he was able to produce the system that he was teaching. Not too dissimilar system from Gurdjieff, who probably had never ever read any of Fludd. And these three foods then blend together to create various metabolic results in accordance with natural laws. And the science of alchemy is knowing how to create more of the finer metabolites, which could then be used for crystallizing higher bodies. Now, I have to say this, that the thing about these higher bodies is that they aren't fully formed when you're born. You actually have to manufacture them. Gurdjieff taught that the three spaces or cavities in the human body, the head, thorax and abdomen, process three different types of food. These foods then blend together to create various metabolic results in accordance with natural laws. And the science of alchemy is knowing how to create more of the finer metabolites, which could then be used for crystallizing higher bodies. And you can see the same thing here in an alchemical symbolism, where you've got a system with a furnace with three retorts on top. That's symbolic of the three chambers of your body: the abdomen, the thorax, and the head. Sublimatio means sublimation, raising upwards. You've got a figure of Saturn on the right there, and he's harvesting those plants, which represent the sun and the moon, and I'm not sure what the other one is. And he's harvesting those, and behind him there's a tree of the sun, and then there's a king and a queen there, standing either side and pointing at the chemical process that's going on, saying that you need to bring these things together, you need to do this work if you're going to produce the stone. And we find some similar ideas in the Chinese system. Chinese are also very, very interested and keen on alchemy, and they wrote alchemical textbooks of their own. And in this one you can see a Taoist, probably a Taoist monk, and he's meditating there, and above his head a little cloud coming up, and there's little little being sitting on the cloud, that's his subtle body, or one of them, coming out through his head. When you see these figures of meditating Buddhas and such like in Tibetan Buddhism or Chinese Buddhism, and you think, well, that's a very sort of passive kind of religion where you just sit around all day meditating. Actually, what they're doing, what that's all about, is this concept of projecting your subtle bodies. That you get the physical body into a certain shape and processing energies, and then you crystallize your higher bodies, and then you can come out inside that higher body and travel around and do other things. So although the physical Buddha might be sitting around doing nothing, the Buddha himself isn't in that body at that moment. He's out doing other stuff in his subtle bodies. This is the concept that's behind it. So Gurdjieff's ideas on alchemy have much in common with the Chinese classic, The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is what this picture's taken from. And it's a meditational textbook for anyone who wants to learn techniques for building subtle bodies that can then be projected. And it again shows you, on Chinese medicine, this idea of the human being having 3 chambers, or 3 burning spaces, or 3 cauldrons. So Gurdjieff had spent time in China and Tibet. It's maybe where he was instructed in this particular teaching. So you have a lower cauldron, which we were talking about before, and then you have a middle cauldron, and then you have an upper cauldron. And the sort of Chinese ideas on alchemy is to fill up your lower cauldron with energy, and then raise that to the next level, and then raise that again to the third level. So you need to be building energies to be able to sort of fill them up. It's like the reverse of those champagne glasses. You know the champagne glasses where you put them all one on top of another, and you pour in the top one, and it cascades down and fills the lower glasses. Chinese system works the other way up. You fill up the lower cauldron, and that bubbles up and fills up the next one, and then the next one. And the idea behind Chinese alchemy is it's possible to circulate internal light. Light energy is drawn up the spine from the perineum, that's sort of at the base of the spine, and then brought back down the front of the body. So you can see as it goes up here, the energy moves up the spine and then back down the front of the body, back down to the perineum. And you can cause this circulation to go on. And that gradually builds up more energy. And this is how Chinese alchemy works. Difficult to do it in Western conditions and the processes of our daily lives. It would be easier if you're tucked away in a monastery up in Tibet somewhere, I expect. But you can still practice, and people do. And there's actually quite a growing movement for this now. And as it circulates, so heavenly energy is mixed with earthly, and the body itself is gradually filled with light. So this is how you're going to fill up those cauldrons, by doing this kind of processing, this kind of internal yoga. And those energies can then be crystallized to form the golden flower, which is the equivalent of what we would call the white and then the red stone. And from this can be developed the higher bodies, just as in the Western alchemy, the red stone can be projected to make gold. Now, another gentleman involved in his whole ideas of transformation, I actually met this man, J.G. Bennett. He was a student of Gurdjieff and Uspensky, one of their most prominent former students. And he was a former intelligence officer in the British Army in the First World War. Just after the First World War, he went to Turkey, where he was responsible for British intelligence, the entire Near East, going all the way to China. And he also spoke many languages, and he was a polymath. And in 1971, at Sherborne House near Cheltenham, he founded an esoteric school of his own. And he taught a system, a whole system of energies, which I haven't got time to go into in any depth here, but it brought the whole ideas up to date, argued them very carefully in Western terms that we can understand, very, very clever, intelligent man. And he developed this extraordinary but very profound philosophy of his own, including advanced ideas on transformation of energy. But the important division, he divides energies from the cosmic down to the most basic into 12 groups, or 12 different levels. And those 12 different levels he put into 3 categories: cosmic, living, and material. And natural science, physics, chemistry, all of what we normally call science, is concerned with the material energies only. And that's why, for instance, when they go along with a tape recorder trying to record ghosts, or trying to understand parapsychology with modern equipment, it doesn't work, because the energies that you're looking at are something entirely different from physical energies that we use in our day-to-day lives. So you can't use the one to research the other. You're looking at, you're trying to measure weight with a ruler. I mean, you can't do it. To explain a little bit about what these energies mean, I developed a diagram of my own which explains the transformation of energy in a car. Now, basically the way a car works, putting it at its most crude, is you're taking the energy from the petrol tank, energy of petrol, there's energy stored as a fuel in the petrol, and you're transforming that energy into directed motion. Now, what happens is the old petrol tank, the energy goes down from chemical energy, and it goes downwards to become heat. And then that heat, some of that heat energy is transferred back up to the car body in form of motion, and some of that is transformed again by the alternator to form electricity, and some of that is stored in the battery. Now, each time you go upwards, you're losing energy through a process that's called entropy, which I'm not going to go into here. And each time you move downwards, you get greater transformation of energy. It's easier to go downstairs than it is to go up, put it simply. So a car works by that process. At the same time, other processes occur which turn some of the motion back into chemical energy that's stored in the battery. In order for energies to be transformed from one to another, an apparatus is required. Right? In the case of the car, the apparatus was the car's energy and its body and so forth. In terms of ourselves, we have an apparatus which we call our body. Such an apparatus is the human being, but unlike an ordinary machine, we're capable of handling even cosmic energies such as consciousness, creativity, and even divine love in our apparatus. Energy can be refined, evolved, or coarsened, involuted. So evolutionary processes are processes of refinement where energy is taken upwards. We were looking at that earlier. And involutionary processes take it downwards, where energy ends up at a degraded form from how it was at the start. So this brings us to the idea of energy levels. There's low or coarse energies, and there's high or refined energies. So there's a kind of what you might call a bar of consciousness. Our consciousness goes up and down constantly. And the lowest level we could call our consciousness is comatose, right? You're in a coma, you're completely out of it. Next level would be sleep. It's not quite as low a level of consciousness as being comatose, but you're still asleep. Above that, you could call being on autopilot. Above that again, aware. Above that, conscious. Above that, superconscious. Above that, transcendent. And we have selves which go with this. There's a material self, a vegetative self, automaton self, ego, true self, which corresponds with consciousness, surrendered self, which is superconsciousness, and cosmic self, which goes with transcendent. So Fludd's cosmic man brings us back, and we can see the whole scale of we're living on many different levels. Processes of descending and ascending energies are the same in meaning as Bennett's. Descending processes and ascending process. And our subtle bodies and energies, we have the physical body, which works with material energies, astral body, which works with psychic energies, the mental body, which works with conscious energies, and the spiritual body, which works with unitive energies. Each body is a specific apparatus that allows us to handle and transform different types and grades of energy, from the physical to the divine. Higher bodies can survive the death of the physical, but without energy they remain passive. It's like a car with no petrol in the tank. You've got to put petrol in the tank before you can use the car, and you've got to put energy into the different bodies before they will work either. So the laws of human alchemy is higher energy can blend with lower energies to give rise to medial energies. These are higher than the lower, but lower than the higher. The fine can nourish the coarse, but coarse always destroys the fine. To acquire gold, i.e. the means for making higher bodies, it's necessary to separate the fine from the coarse. And when active, higher selves have power over lower selves. They may even work what appear to be miracles from the point of view of that which is at a lower level. So we can understand the image here of these different stones. This one shows the mental body, which is androgynous, controlling the lower bodies, the physical, which is the lion, and the astral, which is the serpent. Because it works with higher energies, it stands on a hillock. The tree of the sun represents food for this higher body. It is an analogue for the tree of life spoken of in the book of Revelation. And this version of the red stone has the same meaning. The bat-like wings signify the ability to astral travel at night. And the pelican feeding its young on its own blood signifies self-sacrifice of the higher for the lower. It shows dominion over these biting dogs or dragons that he's standing on, and behind him is the lion, who is again subdued. The cup containing 3 serpents indicates that he's a Trismegistus, or a master over 3 worlds. In other words, he has attained what was sought by Hermes Trismegistus. So I hope you've enjoyed this lecture, ladies and gentlemen. This is the last but one in this series, and I'm sorry that we haven't had time to go into these whole areas in much, much more depth. But I hope that you will take the time and maybe come and visit us at the invisiblecollege.net, www.theinvisiblecollege.net, and come and discuss these ideas with me some more. Thank you very much for your time.